Limited, a subsidiary of First Quantum Minerals Limited.
Good evening. My name is Costa Mwansa, and every Sunday, as always, at 21:15 on Diamond TV, I summon opinion leaders, policymakers, and other key stakeholders in addressing the most pressing news stories of the week. Now, in this year, 2024, I've had the privilege of sitting down and speaking to top-ranking government officials, opposition leaders, civil society organizations, and members of the clergy. My and our mission as a station still remain the same: to ask the questions that many do not want to answer, those relevant questions on behalf of the Zambian people. Beyond our borders, we have expanded our focus by engaging senior government officials from across the SADC region to discuss critical issues affecting the region. Now, as we conclude the year 2024, we will be taking you back on a journey to look at some of the interviews we've had. Now, I'm joined by presenters and producers of current affairs programs on Diamond TV, in Andrew Mwansa from Diamond Live, and Dingindaba, Jonah Buyoya from This Day. Colleagues, good evening, and welcome to Costa as we break down 2024 through the lens of Diamond TV's current affairs programs.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Let's begin, obviously, by just trying to sum up these last 12 months. Today is the 29th, I believe, and we've just got 2 more days before the year 2024 ends. Obviously, for me, it's just like yesterday when we sat in such a manner, in such a fashion, and analyzed. The year seems to have gone by so fast. The drought, triggering food and energy disruptions, the economy, and so on. Let's start with you, Jonah. What's your recollection of the year 2024 through a current affairs lens?
2024, I think, has been interesting. At the top of the current affairs issues have really just been the economic side of things, the lack of energy. Almost in every sense you think of it, we've had no electricity, and for the last quarter of 2024, we've had no electricity and no fuel. So it's been quite hectic for a year. But also the final quarter of 2024 also brought what I think was the biggest story of this year, which was the eligibility of former President Edgar Lungu. So it's been quite heated, and as we got towards the end, we're seeing more and more of a political shift into what is making news.
I thought you were going to say the biggest story of the year is the witchcraft and the chameleon. But,
the aflatoxin as well.
Yes, that was also quite a big story. It was a very big story. It got the country talking. Something that we've never seen before, talking about people's staple food, which is very dear to their hearts, and people now had to start thinking whether they should eat the nshima or not.
But the death of man's best friend as well.
Exactly.
Was it over 400 dogs?
Over 400 dogs dying from the aflatoxicosis, and that was terrible. That was one of the worst that we have experienced in the country.
Andrew, you've seen the more share of TV than the both of us, I think, this year. Obviously, you're on air, taking on the current affairs of each particular day, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Gotten yourself into a bit of sticky situation sometimes. Let's get to hear from you.
It's been a busy year. I remember having this conversation with Jonah 2 weeks ago. He reminded me of how we spoke about the time that the UPND won elections and the first few months, opposition political parties and other civil society organizations wanting to criticize the government of the UPND when there was nothing to criticize them over. And I think some of the critics, came from very, I would call, silly mistakes that perhaps government, could have made at that time. I remember one of the opposition leaders criticizing on how President Hakainde Hichilema is saluting to the men and women in uniform when he's not supposed to be saluting, and I think that became a story. And Jonah told me that, look, opposition political party players ought not to rush into criticizing this government. Time will come, when things will fall in their rightful place, and they'll begin to discuss the issues that government have made mistakes or government, ought to be done. And so, beginning of 2021 was a bit of a hard place for the UPND because also they're trying to really settle in.
2022, you mean?
2022, and the opposition were throwing stones. But I think quickly coming in 2024 for me has been a very busy year. It's as if though every year has been a political and election year. I think the country has not rested from discussing politics, from discussing the economy, from January itself to February up until December. In February, obviously on the 29th of February, the president having to declare the ongoing drought as a national disaster. Thereafter, we saw the arrest of Bowman Lusambo. We did also saw the disappearance of Emmanuel Jeje Banda that made it to, to our news. And all those things, for us as current affairs producers, was news that, we fed on. And so, technically, from January up until December, there's been everything. Almost everything new, that we could discuss. And so it's been a full-packed, 2024. If you ask me, the people that we've spoken to, the interviews also that we've had with top, government officials, like you've mentioned, the key opposition political party leaders and the clergy, discussing these things that are going on in the country. And so it's been a busy year. We've not rested from the politics from January up until now. It feels already like, we're into an election year. So it's been busy for me. It's been busy also for us at Diamond TV.
Well, obviously, like we did say, the fact that we are broadcasting within 4 different countries, 5 including Zambia within the region. South Africa had an election earlier this year. Quite interesting, obviously. The ANC still maintaining power, but obviously the South African electoral system is different. They need to form a sort of coalition, government. It was not easy, especially that the MK under President Jacob Zuma, the Mkhonto Sizwe, came in, ate into the ANC strongholds. Some would have expected Julius Malema and the EFF to perform a bit more better, but obviously quite disappointing. The DA coming in very strongly, and for some week or 2 weeks or so, that story took regional center stage. Then there was Botswana, a serious upset there. Obviously, Duma Boko coming through as president. More recently, I think it's just a month plus or so ago, the incumbent in Masisi was very, very sure that he was going to get back into power. Last I was reading on what's happening in Botswana is that the current president is complaining that the coffers are bankrupt. They might not be able to even pay civil servants. A story we were following, I think, happenings in Malawi, the floods, and so on. Zimbabwe as well. There was a bit of a diplomatic tiff coming out of 2023 into 2024, seeing President Hichilema not attending even certain SADC or Troika meetings. So there's been so much also happening. Mozambique, even after an election, there's been some civil strife and turmoil that has led to what we're currently experiencing now, some fuel disruptions, obviously in that we have to get our petrol from as far as the Dar es Salaam. But back locally as well, I must say, it is important to mention we've been trying to get the head of state onto the Diamond Media platform, written a couple of times. We failed at getting the president to do an interview. We did manage to get Her Honor the Vice President as one of the biggest interviews, but obviously the debt restructuring with the IMF, that deal has kept us busy analysing and breaking down the fact that the budget has had difficult issues. More recently, Parliament had to resit to borrow more money. We had an interview with the Finance Minister because for the longest we were not so sure how much the UPND had borrowed since they came into power. Interesting interviews also that I can look at. We had the Drug Enforcement Commissioner, Director General here, Mr. Nathan Banda, just after he was, appointed. And one of the biggest stories also was the gold scam. In the year, the likes of John Sangwa, I think trying to break down the constitution and so many other issues that have happened, the likes of Makebi Zulu on issues of forfeiture and consents, Sishua as well. We saw that big story where the entire Anti-Corruption Commission board was dissolved, but this followed Dr. Brian Kaba's revelations that there was corruption going on within the UPND administration, and this government was not doing enough. The ACC still remains without a board, if I'm not mistaken, and still remains without a substantive Director General. So all these have been interesting, but I think what I want to ask Jonah is the fact that going into 2025, I know that this day will take a different twist in dedicating some of the stories you'll be doing into investigative aspects. There's been a huge complaint that Zambian journalists either lack the capacity or lack the professionalism to do investigative stories. I want to touch on the fact that now this country has the Access to Information Act. Has this in a way helped? Where's the gap insofar as investigative journalism is concerned?
Well, I think I've always argued that the ATI is not really, it cannot really help the cause of investigations, because the idea is that the ATI gives you information that is supposed to be in the public domain anyway. And investigations are basically digging deep into what doesn't meet the eye. But I think that the problem with investigative journalism in the country is much more complex than, you know, just the surface level. It's a lot of resources that it requires, which resources are very difficult to come by. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of time to finally make sense out of a story that you're investigating. And so that's what we're attempting to do, to produce 6 episodes for 2025 of investigative pieces that we are looking at, and you know, try to get in depth into some of the problems that we are experiencing in the country. And so far, because we started producing this in November, our first episode is supposed to air at the end of February, and it's been really difficult. It's been really difficult. You make progress, and you know, you hit a dead end, and you just have to keep on you know, changing the approach. But I hope that finally we can get people speaking in a positive way about that.
There's lots of expectation, a lot of public demand in that area. I get confronted both as president of Media Owners, both as an executive producer of Diamond Media. We miss the journalism of the Post. We don't have fearless journalists anymore and things like that. But there's more than meets the eye. I understand where the public pressure, the public demand. I mean, you guys fail to investigate basic stories, what is happening in the banks, what is happening here and there. Just give us a brief idea of what a journalist like yourself goes through. I mean, you did follow up, for example, the Codeine syndicate story, and you received threats to your life. At a certain point, you opted to report this, inclusive of the aflatoxin stories, the backlash with government.
Absolutely, and those are some of the things that people don't know. I mean, the drug abuse story was the most bizarre thing, because a lot of people, when you have conversations about codeine, for example, it doesn't really scare people. You know, people don't think that this is such a big deal. It's something they don't encourage and is not supposed to happen, but they don't get surprised that it does happen. So when I did that story, and I am in the presence of colleagues, like the way we're sitting here, and a gentleman comes and sits on the opposite end, and he says, you know, this story that you're doing is such a risk, and his exact words were, it would be very easy to take you out. He even gives me a description. He says it wouldn't cost anything more than $10,000 to get guys from SA to come and fix the problem.
And you are the problem.
Yes, and this is in public. Like, it's not. And the people I was sitting with had no idea what just happened. The guy stands up with his friend and he leaves. And I was so shocked. And that evening, I'm getting home. I found 2 people sitting at my gate. And I'm wondering, what is going on? You know, who are these people? And that's how I opted to report this issue. But even the aflatoxin story, such backlash, you know, from the government. When all we did was report the truth. Exactly. There was nothing untrue about this. And along the way, sources stopped giving the information they were giving, because now the thing has exploded and nobody wants to be associated with telling the truth. So they were, I remember one day I was coming from, I think it was a Friday, I was coming from meeting a source, and then you called me.
that you're about to alarm the nation with fake story. And I mean, that's what we get to go through. You remember that over the aflatoxin story, one of the things that has been difficult from 2023 into this year, whether we can give them a bit of a pat on the back. I think the complaint has been that government officials, ministers especially, don't get to come through to speak on issues. For example, I've been wanting to have an interview with the agriculture minister, especially in a time of food insecurity, in a time of drought, in a time of disrupted fertilizer distribution and all this. He's always unavailable. Andrew, as my producer, can share the most bizarre thing that happened amidst the energy crisis, and that for weeks we've been talking to a fake energy minister.
For weeks we've been talking to a fake energy minister.
I remember that, yeah.
I don't know if I should tell the story, but we had attempted to get the energy minister, not Makozo Chikote, the minister before Makozo Chikote, and I think we had gone to extents where...
That's Peter Kapala, isn't it?
That's Honorable Peter Kapala. We were even communicating, we were even calling each other, and I think at some point he said he was attending a meeting outside the country, and he was going to make it the moment he comes into the country. We continued communicating, and I think we had rescheduled the
There was a COP meeting in Dubai.
There was a COP meeting in Dubai, and he's attending, and all those things. Myself and Silvio, were in correspondence with the minister. I think a week before we filmed the interview, he had asked for what issues we would like to touch on, and I think we were so magnanimous enough to be able to send some of the issues that we'll be able to touch on.
Inclusive of the night before?
Yes, and the night before, so that he is able to prepare adequately. A night before, I think around 19 hours, he calls me to tell me that he's actually not the energy minister. He's a provincial minister somewhere.
He's a provincial permanent secretary.
He's a provincial permanent secretary and not the minister of energy, because that was a Saturday. We were supposed to have had the interview on Sunday. So at around, I called him at 18, he didn't pick. I texted minister, I'm reminding you that we have an interview tomorrow on Costa. Please come through. And he saw the message. Around 15, then at 18 I called, he didn't pick. At 19 he calls me back and says, there should be a mistake. I'm not Minister of Energy. I'm Provincial Permanent Secretary, for this respective province. There should have been a mix-up. So I called Silvio that, can you believe what has happened? This man we've been talking to all this while is not the minister. And the irony was that we had even advertised that the following day we'll be having the Minister of Energy coming in for Costa, and these are some of the issues that we're going to be looking at, on our social media platforms and on TV as well. And so that interview never happened.
But all along,
all along, what is more important is one thing that you've mentioned at the height of the drought, and I think a person was very important to be spoken to for people to understand exactly what is happening with the Minister of Agriculture.
But if up to now I'm still very baffled about the whole situation. If at all it was somebody impersonating the minister, they did a pretty damn good job, because we could relate on so many things. I would text and he would say I'm in Parliament. so up to now, whether it was impersonation, but that interview didn't happen. Luckily, though, we'll go through this. We managed to have the new energy minister. I felt he was magnanimous and brave enough amidst a crisis. First interview, and we got straight into it. We also had the privilege of interviewing then ZESCO MD. Whose contract has not been renewed,
Victor
Mapani. Quite good answers and quite a good interview we had. I mean, amidst the fact that ZESCO was not sticking to schedules and really what the problem is with debt, Mamba and so on, quite an interesting issue. And it's always important that when people interact through such platforms, the people get informed, people get educated, and they know really what's happening. But back to the aflatoxin story, I remember that Again, there was a reshuffle in the ministry. I think it came out of issues at ZAMSA and missing, was it containers and things like that. So Honorable Masebo left, then there was now Honorable Muchima. And again, this is an interview that never got to happen because government now at a certain point was so concerned, especially when we advertised. Again, we spoke to Minister Muchima, who confirms he's coming. I'm in studio. Andrew says I've spoken to Minister. Minister is driving to studio, and this other government official just calls and says, we'll not give you the minister. And the usual is obviously to give State House as the excuse. The minister has been summoned by State House. They won't make it. But somebody's magnanimous enough and says, no, I think we do not want to embarrass government. We would rather give you a different official. But we say you cannot dictate. If it's a health issue, you cannot give us the Minister of Justice or the Minister of Commerce. So these are interviews, again, where people feel we're not doing enough to get to the bottom of the story. Getting back to the Access to Information Act, yes, it's information that is supposed to be in public domain, especially, for example, if government says that they have not sold off Mopani, it's only now in public interest that we look at the transaction or the documents that were signed through this ATI. It's not been operationalized. Mr. Kawana's good word that he likes to use, operationalization, and calls me notorious for that word. Much more has to be done. And the fact that this has to be administered through the Human Rights Commission, we're yet to see a serious matter of the ATI Act really in force. But as we will talk about a little later, also it's the eligibility case that saw for the very first time that court was not held in camera. The matter was being broadcast, though others say it was to suit certain political interests. But we'll discuss that later. Maybe we move on to the first interview that we get to review.
Yes, I think one of the biggest interviews of the year was with the Vice President. We had the privilege of having the Vice President at her official residence, Government House. And very interesting. So we've got just a few excerpts of this interview. So let's just take a look at this and remind ourselves of what the interview looked like.
Kenya wants our maize, Zimbabwe wants our maize. But why haven't we gotten it right in terms of a quota that we grow for exports and earn money away from copper? But also on a domestic level, is that if there's panic on the smuggling, the cost of the meal becomes high. And Zambians already ask, why wonga udula if we have a bumper harvest? Why wonga udula tirima chinyanja? Why? That's the issue.
But also simply, that's why the issue you brought to Mwansa. So Mwansa is different from Lusaka. Bwanji, don't take me into Nyanja. Why is the cost of meal high? Yes, the panic buying comes in. But the issue I think that you started with is, why haven't we gotten it right in terms of smuggling? This is what the president was dealing with. You have to deal with both countries. I'm using one country, for example. If they need it in Congo, we have to agree that can we stop? Can we do it right? Can we export properly? Because if we do, then the people there will not be forced to come and buy from us at a smuggled level. This is what this government is doing. We already have done the quota system you are talking about because we believed humanly that there would be food because people grew, including myself. Now I'm a small farmer.
Very interesting interview. One of the things I wanted to highlight before we talk about the actual interview is how the Vice President and her team insisted that it should be live, because normally, for such a high-profile interview, we'd like for it to be recorded, but they insisted that it needed to be live. And why did they insist that it should be live? They wanted phone calls.
And instant feedback.
And instant feedback from the public. And I was a bit nervous about that, but I mean, if it's always great if they're open to this. It's always a great experience being a part of such a high-profile interview, and I remember how much work it was just putting it together and making sure that the viewer has the experience. But it was also quite a contrast of an interview from the last time that you had an interview with her
when she was in the opposition.
In the opposition as national chairperson. I think that was her position in the UPND. And what was coming to mind was when she said the PF were evil. Her tone was completely different, and you also had a very interesting back and forth with her about the exchange rate, because I was in his ear and I kept saying, go back to the issue. The issue of the exchange rate.
And I think this is one thing, and I know that those in government would not like this, but the vice president, the president himself inclusive on this matter, they give very wrong figures in terms of how much the exchange rate was at when they took power. And we decided to quote official Bank of Zambia rates, if you remember, and she argued on that. And famously now the vice president has been known with her famous increase
to reduce
because it's the inflation, it's the exchange rate, it's the price of commodities, especially millimil. But like you say, the build-up, obviously, it was months.
Yes.
The vice president's office is a very busy office. And for me, kudos to her and her staff, because at the time we were granted that interview, she was actually in transition of being acting president at that point.
That night, actually, yes. I remember, because there was a bit of some protocol issues. We started the interview off with her as vice president. Then we got told that she was the acting president. Then we got told that the president is back
in the country,
and you need to correct that she's not the acting president. And
but I think for me, what is most important is the work that was done in the background. And like you said, CVO, that kudos to the staff of the vice president. I think every media house has been wanting to have the vice president, especially this year, and she agreed. Kudos, let me mention specific names to Njenje Chizu, who was very magnanimous in ensuring that we have this interview, with the vice president. When they confirmed in the first place, we thought, well, they've confirmed and perhaps this interview will never see light of them. But eventually, they had reconfirmed and said we're going to go on with the interview in that respective week, and we gave them an option to say you can either come to our studio or we can come to where you are in a place where you're comfortable. And the staff said let's film from Government House, but it should be live. I remember when I told this to Jonah, he said, Andrew, it won't work out. We can't. And I said, specifically, they've asked that they need to have feedback also.
Phone calls was a nightmare, technical nightmare.
But I love the build-up also to this, because she kept posting about, the vice president was very happy about the interview. She even kept posting that I'm ready for you, Costa. I think 3 days before the interview, I think she consistently posted about this interview to build a hype around the interview. And I think for me, to be honest with you, I think she was equal to the task in terms of her responding to some of the questions, though I personally feel that some of the questions she didn't respond as people would have wanted to respond. But I think just the braveness that she had to face Costa and be able for us to have an interview live, at our residence, for me, it is kudos to our office and herself, the vice president.
Yeah. Obviously, like Jonah said again, you're used to the comfort of your studio and so on. I mean, you have to get your phones screened and searched and so on. And it's also the fact that you have colleagues like the PS Information coming to sit in through the interview. But I think for me, it's the issue of this administration wanting to open up, that you can get anybody, getting the vice president obviously to speak on an array of issues. The economy has not been in a very great state, and the fact that she was able to bite the bullet and obviously to speak to some of those issues. There was a point where she admitted that they feel they could do better, and I think resoundingly for me, the big takeaway from that interview was the aspect of asking Zambians for more time and assuring them of hope. but the numbers for me really didn't really tally. And I remember her saying to me, now you're confusing me, you're piling too much. I thought we were going to go one by one on those issues. So yeah, the build-up and the venue, but by and large, I think the numbers in terms of that night, the ratings
were very high,
and obviously the calls and things like that, it was balanced, but not a very easy interview to pull. But alas, we managed.
Yes, we did, and yeah, you're right. I think one of the things, Andrew, you say is that the quality of the interview in terms of her responses. I think that it's very. It's bringing you back to reality as a leader, actually, having these interviews, because leaders that have been in opposition and finally get into office get a taste of what reality is like.
Yeah, that's true.
And the only challenge that comes in is when you're vice president, when you're president, we have a yardstick with which we use to measure your success, and it is purely based on what you said you would do and what you're doing. So you will come onto an interview and give an accurate, to an extent, position of what is happening on the ground. But it is in contrast with what your projected plan was. And I guess that's where the problem is, because there's no opposition leader who's coming in to tell people that the kwacha is going to be at 27. You know, when we come into office, we'll move it from 22 and it will go to 27. So nobody says that. They say they'll bring it down.
We'll move fuel from 24
exactly.
to 32, 33 kwacha.
Nobody's saying that. They're all saying they're going to reduce it. So when we bring you on an interview, and we say, but you said you would reduce it, but it's increasing. And you say, well, but look at what's going on. You know, the economy is but yes, you are right, but that's not what you committed, and that's where the
I think for the whole year, this has been the most difficult part for many of those in administration, whether they overpromised or they've given the Zambians a raw deal. But I love, obviously, it's an expected way. They will talk about free education. They will talk about the restoration of the rule of law and order.
And the 30,000
and the recruitment
teachers.
of teachers and nurses. But beyond the Vice President's interview, we also had a chance, because mining has been a larger part of the discourse from last year into this year. The fact that KCM was a thorny issue. Now we are very well aware that Vedanta is back, and things are still rolling out there. Mopani was still stuck in care and maintenance. IRH from Abu Dhabi did come in, and then there was this controversial, and it still remains sticky, even on the floor of Parliament, that government is supposed to seek parliamentary approval in selling a public asset. They still insist through the Minister of Mines that Mopani has not been sold. And the question is, when there's transfer of share or equity buying, what does that really mean? We had a chance of speaking to Minister of Mines, Paul Kabuswe, and obviously these were some of his responses.
And this will be split between the equity and debt. In return for this new equity capital, IRH gets 51% stake in Mopani. Government returns 49% through ZCCM IH. When I buy shares or stake in your business, Minister, you're simply selling me that. Why does this government refuse that you've sold 51% shares in Mopani and you're saying this is not a sale?
Well, thank you very much, Costa, for that question. I may not delve so much in the legal issues because I'm not a lawyer myself. But you understand that government operates with different departments and different ministries, one of which hosts who we call the government legal advisor, who is the Attorney General. I think that a few days ago even gave an opinion on the fact that this is a legal transaction and everything was done by the book. And as government, we invited IRH and different people that were interested in becoming our partners in Mopani. And that partnership was, like you said, a mutually respectful and mutually beneficial agreement and partnership. And when we engaged various players that were interested in Mopani, we settled for that partnership, and that is why there was no handover per se on that day. And that is why you've not seen me signing, because as Minister of Mines, when there's a sale, I'm supposed to sign what we call.
So that was the interview with Mines Minister Paul Kabo. So it still remains a very confusing, issue. This the fact that Glencore was paid about $600 million from the initial $1.4 billion that they were being owed. IRH also had to bring in working capital to pay off, certain suppliers that were being owed money, and then also reinvest into this. The big question is, when you put these monies together that IRH is paying Glencore and is putting back working capital, what is theirs if they've not been given, equity? But I believe they're equity partners. And I think the minister has equally gone onto the floor of Parliament. And what is interesting now is that I think there was a model that was designed to create more shares. So the old shares are returned by ZCCMIH through government, but there's more shares, I think, from what the minister was explaining on the floor of Parliament, that have been this issue on RH being unveiled as an equity partner. Is this a good or bad deal? Was parliamentary approval sought or not sought? I think you've been covering this as well from the This Day perspective.
Yes, I have. And, to an extent, there's one thing I do agree with government on, and it's that the mines and machinery has to start turning. And I think that we've also seen over the last few years the impact of reduced productivity from the mining sector. Some of the consequences of what we are seeing today are because of the reduction in production of the mining sector. We all agree that the economy must be diversified. Diversification of the economy is very important, but I think that it needs to be done in a very gradual manner. Instead of running away from mining, we need to scale up production, if anything, because we've been underproducing, if I may. So I completely agree with government that we need to get the mines to move. There's also another thing that the president says, and it's that you don't mine in the courts of law. You mine on the ground, which is absolutely true. It doesn't evade or erase the fact that government has got accountability to its people.
And needs to do things above board.
Exactly. Because when things are not done, in a systematic manner, whoever is going to take over government is going to have consistent complaints, as the UPND administration has had. They have said that the Patriotic Front was not doing things in a right manner, hence the legal challenges that they found when they came into office. The only reason why those things were working under the Patriotic Front is because when you are still in office, if even your own car, if your car has got a challenge, you know how to treat it. And if you give it to somebody else, they'll probably damage it completely, or they'll be unable to use it. So the Patriotic Front has a system. Things are moving because there's something that they've done somewhere that's making things move. And then somebody else takes over and they can't kind of figure it out. So if things are not done systematically and we're not following the right procedure, it's going to be a big challenge for continuity. Whoever comes in next, things cannot move on their own, but things should ideally move. So the biggest issue with these mining agreements that we've been signing is that they have not been above board. Like they've got a lot of questions, if I may.
Before Andrew comes in, obviously you're right there. Let's take the KCM issue, for example. We had reached a stalemate in the courts, and I think the president made it very clear. From a political standpoint, when the PF ditched Vedanta Resources, it was due to the fact that they had lost the social capital with the people on the mining towns of Chingola and Chilabombwe, in that they did not fulfill most of their investment pledges. I think the over 1 billion investment pledges that they made into Konkola Deep Mine and everything else that they said. And even at the international platform, I think the chairperson, Anil Agawal, was making fun of the fact that he bought the mines for a song and he made so much profits. There was a binding agreement that was in place, and the way government exited obviously overruled the aspects of a mediation and so on. And if we were to pursue this through the courts as a country, we were definitely going to lose out because the contract was breached. And this is where you're coming from. So with the KCM aspect, I think it's just the matter of upholding what the previous agreement was. And after mediation, obviously Vedanta comes back to the table and realizes that they need to recommit. The fact that they'll put a reinvestment over $1.2 billion. Furthermore, an extra $250 million towards debt and paying off workers and so on. We're yet to see whether some of these things are happening. We're being told they've started happening. For me, it's about the finer detail of how do we hold these investors accountable to these investment pledges. Even on the global stage, Vedanta has not been so much in a very good financial position. They're a very bad creditor. Coming back to Mopani, it still remains a sticky issue because I know that lawmakers such as Mwansa have taken the Minister of Mines to court on the issue of seeking parliamentary approval. Andrew, you've been interacting with Honourable Sampa quite often.
Yes.
What's the position on this?
Well, the position is what you've said. Honourable Mwansa has dragged the Minister of Mines to court, Honourable Paul Kawuswe, over the fact that the transaction that happened between International Resource Holdings and the Zambian government through the CMIH needed to pass through Parliament before the transfer of shares, was arrived at. The minister, was very adamant. In fact, he made a mysterious statement in Parliament that the transaction that happened didn't need no parliamentary approval because it's not a transfer of shares or a disposal of an asset, of a public asset, but it was merely a partnership. You know that the stake we're getting as Zambia is 49%, whilst International Resource Holding is getting 51% in this particular deal. As a majority shareholder. As a majority, shareholder. And I think there's been,
so how do they become, or how did they become a shareholder?
And so, according to the minister, he says that this was not a property belonging to government. The evidence that is given is that, look, the Attorney General already gave an opinion on this matter, and he advised the minister and government that this asset didn't belong to the Zambian government.
Well, we did own part of it through ZCMIH, unless we're saying that Glencore had not relinquished their shares. But I remember, again, interviewing former mines minister in Richard Musukwa at the point that Glencore was exiting. There was that agreement. And I think it was on Diamond Live when we even brought on then opposition UPND leader, Hakainde Hichilema, saying the Mopani Glencore deal was a bad deal. I think it was about the $1.4 billion plus the 10 years in which we're supposed to be remitting a percentage of revenue towards copper production.
And I mean, the backdrop of what happened at KCM was that immediately there was an exit at KCM. Sorry, I'm going to take you back to KCM. And Mopani itself, the idea of the Patriotic Front government when there was this transition was for, or the argument they were advancing to the people was that they need to take ownership of these mines, and so the Patriotic Front government took the route they took so that these resources belong to the Zambian people. Hence, the Zambian government taking stake in these mines to become majority shareholders.
Those are very important questions that were asked to the minister, and he says, oh, these are lies. This is according to the UPND. But I think one thing that came out of that particular interview is the fact that the minister bossed was the fact that, from the time they came into office in 2021 up until now, there's been in excess of over $7.5 billion into the mining sector. Alone, International Resource Holdings for recapitalization, for paying the contractors, they injected $1.1 billion, into Mopani, and he says that more money is coming into Mopani. But I think the gist of things, like you mentioned earlier on, is the fact that the UPND government have made a principle that let's not fight these battles in the courtroom. Let's fight them, out of the court, and that's the reason for why we've seen the opening up of Mopani, KCM again, and these other mines that they've invested in through FDI. the parliamentary approval, colleagues, still remains a very thorny issue, and I think we'll see what the court is going to pronounce itself on, because Mao-Sampa has dragged the Minister of Mines, to court over this matter. But another interesting interview that we did at the height of the energy crisis was with the Minister of Energy, Honorable Makozo Chikote. At the time that he was contacted for an interview, I didn't think he was going to accept, because this is a gentleman that just got into office. You remember that there was that cabinet reshuffle where the Minister of Fisheries went, where the Minister of Energy then, Honorable Peter Kapala, was transferred.
An engineer.
An engineer was transferred to Fisheries, and then we have this Minister, Makozo Chikote, who was transferred to Energy. We attempted to call. The first call, he said, "I'm game." I said, "You're going to face Costa Mwansa, and you're going to appear on Costa." He says, "Andrew, I'm game. I want to explain what government is doing over the issue of load shedding." It was at a time when the height of load shedding was really so bad that the country.
I think we were about to get to the height of load shedding.
We're about to get to the height of load shedding. I think we're at a period when we had people are complaining of how inconsistent the schedules, were. And the fact that sometimes ZESCO would not announce that power would be cutting for so many hours, and we're just about to get to the worst part of it. But we called him. He accepted the interview, and here's an excerpt of part of the interview that we had with him.
The current situation is a disaster. It's a crisis. Households have been affected. ZESCO says 21 hours of load shedding daily, 3 hours of power. Homes don't get power in certain instances for as much as 4 to 5 days, inclusive of businesses. The schedule is no longer, followed. Ndio zaba into zero. People cannot do business. Many are saying that this government has failed the people of this republic. Shouldn't you be resigned for failing the people, Minister?
Thank you very much, Costa. To start with, we must accept that we are in the crisis as a country. And I want to say that the New Dawn government has a heart for the people. And we must also understand that this is a disaster for the country, which has really affected the livelihood of our people, which has affected our economy, and it's not a situation that this government is celebrating. We are with the people, and we really feel very bad for this situation. But first thing is to accept that this is a natural disaster. It's not a man-made, disaster. It's not a disaster that has been created by this government. It's something arising from the climate change.
That was the interview with just newly, appointed Energy Minister Makozo Chikote. First of all, I'd like to make mention that when most of these issues started happening, obviously exacerbated from the drought, the energy, the food disruptions and so on, people expected that the president, inclusive of disruptions within the fuel, because people are not still comfortable with the monthly reviews, they were expecting that some heads would roll, and what this president seemingly has done is not fire anybody, but just reshuffle his cabinet. I don't think he's fired any minister. He
did fire the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Of Foreign Affairs. What's the Kakubo, Honorable Stanley Kakubo.
And Luapula Province Minister as well.
So I think there was a bit of apprehension in that you get, first of all, you get an engineer in Peter Kapala, take him to livestock and fisheries and get, I think we also try to look at the qualifications, whether it's business administration or I think it's public administration of Honorable Chikote. But for me, the fact that he was able to heed to calls that there was very little information that was coming from top government officials, especially amidst this crisis. So you hear him speak to the fact that they needed to admit that this was a disaster, they needed to admit that they meant well. I needed to ask him that question in that maybe it was a bit unfair that he was just very new into the office. Maybe we should have been asking the previous minister that maybe they had felt, first of all, ineffectively communicating, ineffectively sharing schedules with ZESCO, which they still continue to fail to do. And I feel sorry even for this minister because it seems he's gone under a rock. We often now hear not of this energy minister. But in that first week or weeks, Andrew, you remember when I asked him about the fact that when does he think the situation might get better in terms of hours? He assured me that Mamba, once Mamba comes back on
the 1st of October.
On the 1st of, and I told him that Mamba was scheduled for another maintenance, and he refused. I remember him calling you that he was misled. So the incoherence in communication, maybe run us through that.
Well, I think one thing that we must acknowledge, CVO and Jonah, is the fact that the minister, even in the first question, he takes accountability. He acknowledges the fact that this situation that we are in as a country was not what the UPND had planned, but because of this natural calamity, that's why, we are in this situation. And when he came, to the interview, I think for me, he did a pretty much good job in trying to respond to some of the questions that were asked by yourself. He had assured the nation in that interview that the power situation will stabilize by the 1st of October. Now, I think when we ran that headline for the first time, I think people thought that perhaps people will be having power for at least 18 hours.
No. I think it was very clear. I think it was very clear, even in that interview, that it would be 7 hours. It would be 7 hours of electricity in a day.
Yes,
that is the commitment that he made, and that's the story that we read. And let's be fair to the people, Andrew. The people were okay with 7 hours, which they never got.
So I think when he said,
I understand
the situation will be stabilized.
My producer, he's always in a situation where he needs to play the good guy that needs to get me the guests.
Not really, but I think for me, I think the follow-up question
and so when he says the minister did a pretty good job, I don't think he did a pretty good job.
I also don't think so. Actually, I think it was maybe because it was the first. It was the first.
He was new. He was new.
But it was a very poorly.
And I don't think
interview.
I don't think he had a grip on issues at that particular time, and understandably so.
Yeah.
This is why I'm saying kudos to him in that you're just appointed within that week, and it's not about who you're facing really, whether it's me or Jonah or anybody else, but the fact is, I think this administration has performed poorly on really getting a very cohesive communication plan around the issue of load shedding. Yes, we understand that the drought has triggered. At a certain point, they wanted to play the blame game in the fact that there was no investment in the hydropower sector. You remember that during campaigns, the PF were boasting of the fact that they had left a capacity of over 3,000 megawatts.
Yeah.
We broke this down with then ZESCO MD, that at full capacity, if everything is okay, you'll have over 3,300 megawatts. Now we were at a capacity of below 1,100 megawatts. And like Jonah is saying, all the people was asking for are basic answers. That in the midst of this crisis, showing leadership, when do we get back to some sort of normalcy? And I think the biggest challenge is failing to explain the issue of exporting amidst a crisis. And he admitted that they were exporting 250 megawatts, in fact 400 megawatts of power, and that they had scaled down 150 and remained with 250. And they still couldn't explain that. I also remember in that interview, because that's at a point where the president had posted this video on social media that he was spending sleepless nights.
But I think also we must be very quick to mention that I think at the time that when 2 days remained before the 1st of October, I think he had held a press briefing to correct what he had initially projected, because the projection was that by 1st of October there's going to be stabilization, when he was informed by his technocrats that there was changes in terms of the maintenance at Mamba Collieries, which you had mentioned to him. I think he was very quick enough to hold a press briefing to explain to the people that the initial plan, yes, that was that stabilization was supposed to come on the 1st of October, but there's been an extension of this maintenance and it's going to go for an extra week. And I think for me, that is what is important. Where a minister makes a mistake, he comes back to the people and said, I made a mistake here, and the correct position is this. But also, I think we must be quick to mention that even the very few things that is done whilst at the ministry that now look like a brighter future for the country in terms of, our energy crisis. One of the things that is done, Silvio and Jonah, is to be able to appoint a substantive PS. There was no PS at ZESCO. Now there's a PS at ZESCO who's been given one responsibility to ensure that all the MOUs that government had signed that need to come to life are followed up on. And I think from the last from the last briefing that he held, he mentioned very clearly that beginning January, we must be able to see certain things getting to see light of day in terms of the MOUs that government has signed with some of the investors.
I think one of the things that we also need to put into perspective here is the fact that the cost of incompetence is very high. It sounds like a minister of electricity, which was appointed in South Africa. The issues that are, being dealt with at the moment with the energy crisis, of course, are far beyond what meets the eye. But I think that there's certain demands that are supposed to be met by the people. The energy situation in the country has not improved since the minister came into office. The energy situation in the country has gotten worse. I don't know if you've not noticed that.
Despite when you say that there's a PS for ZESCO specifically?
There's PS for ZESCO.
So a permanent secretary is brought into place, and let me finish my
and this
line
new
of thought.
PS has even failed to give us consistent schedules.
Which is something I was coming to. Apart from the fact that there's basically no electricity in the country and the situation keeps getting worse, there's also no consistency. One of the things that people, and let me speak from business's point of view actually, one of the things that businesses have been asking for is just for a steady supply of electricity. Steady supply, not in terms of the hours, but to know when electricity will be there and when it won't. What does this have to do with the energy minister? Well, under the energy minister is the Energy Regulation Board, which is supposed to deal with ZESCO, because ZESCO has an agreement with the ERB on behalf of the people. Among the conditions is that every time there is no electricity at your house, ZESCO must be held accountable and they must inform you that there's not going to be electricity at such a time and it's going to be restored at such a time. ZESCO has terribly failed at that. But who does the buck stop at? It's the Minister of Energy. And why is this something that should be held on him as accountability? He's paid for that job,
I agree, Jonah. Sorry, to just chip in there. And I think, Andrew, as producer, you still have a big job that we need to bring back this minister onto Costa. He's gone under a rock because the power situation still continues to be a very disturbing issue. For businesses, you cannot plan. And the disjoint between the Ministry of whether it's economy, or green economy and environment, we've even failed to actively or accurately project rainfall patterns. We were being told by the 8th or the 12th, seemingly not working, and people now are disturbed when they are told there's going to be rain. There's no rain, so we hope there's rain so that the power situation can improve. There again, there's a disjoint in terms of information. But beyond the power situation is the fuel. When the president appointed the new energy PS this year in Dr. Peter Mumba, he told him specifically to go and rework the fuel pricing mechanism back to the quarterly strategy. This has not happened. We don't know why. It's still monthly, and it's still getting worse, because even just late last week, certain filling or service stations do not have petrol. And so I think the minister here, kudos that he jumped in at the time he was just appointed. We believe he's settled down and settled more, but we still need to bring him back and get more clarity, because going into a new year, I think people would be expectant. Will the power situation improve now that it has rained a bit heavily in the northern half of the country? Do we expect to be taken to, is it 7 hours or 8 hours or 12 hours of power for planning purposes? How do we normalize the fuel situation? Because it helps to create numbers. So in the energy sector, I think there we've not really had very positive issues, Andrew. But I know quickly that there's one interview again that seems to
interview of the year
to be making headlines around numbers, around reviews by so-called professionals, political pundits, political scribes. Andrew, maybe you take it up.
Well, many describe this as an interview of the year, and obviously the feedback that we've been getting so far with the advert that we put up on social media to ask people which interview they think made it, for them this year. They said Costa versus Sean Tembo, because Costa finally did meet his match. But for the people that could have possibly missed the interview, let's quickly flash back to how the interview looked like.
You're acting more like I'm speaking to the UPND Secretary General.
No, with all due respect, with all due respect. No,
That's the way you act.
With all due respect, I would not allow you to brand me as a cadre.
No, I'm not saying you're a cadre. I'm saying you're acting like a cadre.
No, but if I keep you accountable, is it true?
You're not keeping me accountable. You are arguing with me and you are not allowing me to explain.
No, but when you say...
If I was having this discussion with the UPND Secretary General, then maybe I would understand.
Let's give it
but I'm having this discussion with you.
Are you being honest as a Zambian when you say there's no natural calamity right now when there's a drought? Are you being honest?
Which there is a drought. Even under PF there was a drought.
No, but this is what I'm saying. You're saying that they are not going through COVID. They're not going through anything.
But under PF,
I'm saying is there no
under
drought?
the previous administration, they had a combination of all those calamities.
No,
but they still managed.
Yeah, but is it correct for you to say there's no calamity now?
Well, there is some drought, but that drought, Costa. Let me explain to you. That drought is not the way it is being portrayed by government. Zambia is a big country. We have 10 provinces. You agree with me? At least let's agree on the provinces. We can argue on other things. Zambia has 10 provinces, isn't it? Out of those 10 provinces, Costa, 5 of them had ample rainfall, a lot of rainfall up there north. All the entire northern block had ample rainfall. Only the southern part of the country, the other 5 provinces, didn't have rainfall. So that's why the drought that we're talking about now cannot be compared with the drought we had in 2017, because the drought in 2017 was across the entire country. The only reason that the drought this time around sounds very prominent is because it has been hyped up by the current administration to explain their failures. If we had a competent...
That was the interview with Sean Tembo, and obviously I have looked at so many reviews of people branding me drunk, unprofessional, having to meet my match. But I think the best thing to say is, first of all, when we do these interviews, and it's not about me as an individual or the station, it's not a competition. It's not a match. I think when one is doing an interview, there is a subject and there is an objective that we want the audience to get something out of it. One of the things I try as much as possible to personally do in an advent of mis or disinformation is the fact that I would have somebody sit across me and they would blatantly give misinformation, and I sit there and tolerate the fact that I would not correct something. So to outrightly say, I think he was making statements in that interview that there was no drought, and I think I was trying to clarify that. Secondly, he was branding people who work for the Zambezi River Authority as basically UPND appointees and cadres. Now, this is a shared body between Zimbabwe and Zambia, I'm made to believe, and they had projected issues of rainfall, and he outrightly said we can't trust anything that anybody under this UPND government says. He outrightly denied the fact that Ndola Energy on the Copperbelt was producing 105 megawatts of power, and this is a fact because it's on the table. And I couldn't just allow an interview to go through with the fact that somebody was denying these things. On hindsight, I mean, I've read so many reviews of this. Some, unfortunately, from a political lens, even go to a score sheet of Sean Tembo 10 and the interviewer 0 or 1. I don't think we go into an interview to see who wins. I think at the end of the day, it's about the audience winning to get something out of it. And it's unfortunate that it should be branded as a competition. At some point, it turned a bit messy or noisy because we really couldn't get to understand each other. But we are never unprofessional to the extent that, as people will take it, to say maybe the interviewer was drunk or what had happened or he was emotional. You were there even after the interview.
Well, I was there even after the interview. I think it was the noisiest interview that we've had this year. We couldn't get much substance from that interview because I think yourself and him, back and forth in terms of getting facts right, he didn't agree with that those things that you were saying were facts, and I think that made it very difficult. But also I think I just didn't also like the fact that he now began to brand you as as a cadre,
as a Secretary General.
He thought that he was speaking to a Secretary General of the UPND. And I think after the interview was done, I think I had an option whether to flight the interview or not, because we had pre-recorded that interview. I just didn't like that he came on air and he had disrespected my presenter. But also, we wanted to maintain the professionalism that we have as a station. When people say stuff here on Diamond TV that we don't like, I think ours is to provide a platform. All right. If my presenter, who is Costa on Sunday, has a disagreement with a guest, it will not affect the things that they were talking about, and that's the reason for why we flighted that, particular interview. It was very noisy. I can't lie to you. And I think one surprising thing was that the time that we flighted that interview to air in the night as live, we had a lot of people watching that interview. Many were saying that for a very long time, they have never seen someone who would match the energy that Costa has, who would tell Costa, to his face, what the guest, thinks about, and Sean Tembo had the confidence, to do so. It also gave me a picture of the type of things that our people gravitate towards. Because I remember the time that we had an interview with CEO of First Quantum. I think what an interview with the CEO of First Quantum, and the CEO was projecting figures of what we've done as a country in terms of the mining sector and the monies that we're about to receive as a country and what this entails for the economy. I expected, for example, that particular interview to have a lot of people, because then this is one who is speaking to the real issues that are on the ground and things that are going to benefit the country. But a politically sound interview like the one you had with Sean Tembo, having so many people watching, I think for me, it just painted to me a picture of the type of things that people, gravitate towards.
I think it's the fact that it's entertaining to watch. I agree that there was, you could barely go 2 minutes and get anything like what is being said, but it's entertaining to watch. People like the
back and forth.
The back and forth.
It became drama.
Exactly. So for people, it was interesting to watch this kind of thing. I think that as somebody that does interviews, that's a very difficult interview to do, to endure, because I always say that doing this kind of work, it's not acting. Like, it's not acting. We're not acting. We're talking about real things. So if you don't want to acknowledge the real things in the real sense of them, it becomes very difficult.
But one thing over the years, one thing over the years, and I just want to make this thing very clear. I think there's some sort of brand that I have been given, or the program has been given, of being aggressive, or that our aim is to bring guests and embarrass them. I think that's not the aim, really. It's just to hold whoever we're talking to, whether civil society or opposition, accountable. And the departure point between me and Sean Tembo, by the way, that's why I was asking you to talk about the post-interview, because we still remain cordial and we spoke. There's no bad blood around it. he will still come onto Diamond. We will still give him platform because it's like that.
Yes.
But I think the departure point was me trying to hold him accountable with the fact that he said things about Edgar Lungu when he was president, and now he was departing from those things. And also part of what the audiences do not understand is that as journalists, there's what you call confidentiality of sources. There are things that me and Sean Tembo discussed before the interview that even today or on the program, I could not reveal on the basis as to why he's changed his standpoint, and out of respect because he was sharing these things with me as a news source. But as a professional journalist, as a professional station, when we sit to watch such interviews and do what we call post-productions, there are things which we feel I could have done better, we could have done better in ensuring that the audience gets out the best and we siphon the noise. But also, was the interview cut short? Not at all, because we had actually overrun.
I think one of the things that is trending also on social media was the fact that after Costa got emotional, he decided to end the interview and all that. But I think the fact of the matter is that we had actually overrun the interview.
Well, the guest said it, didn't
Himself,
he?
yes,
He said, no, but we've done enough time.
Enough time. I think we did about 1 hour, 18 minutes.
That was funny, though.
For that interview. When we were supposed to do 55 minutes, we even overran that interview by about 25 minutes. And so we didn't cut short the interview.
Yeah.
I think we had finished the interview. And so for people, I think let's make it clear tonight that for people that think that Costa Mwansa here cut the interview because he was not happy with how Sean Tembo was responding, the truth is that that's not true. We did finish the
But
interview.
by the way, obviously, it's the fact that we're used to these things of when one is ending an interview, thank you so much. Obviously, the ending was not the usual because, since we can't not agree on anything, we have to end the interview here. And I think for me that was the right thing to do at that moment because I was not going to allow him to give misinformation on only... Because, I mean, if we invite somebody onto the program, yes, they need to say their part, but would not allow them just to outrightly say what they feel, even if it is not true. That's the holding accountable. And again, what was going through my mind at that particular point, no ill feelings, no emotionality. And I've read so many reviews in how people are schooling me about the basics of interviews, and I appreciate that. But also one learning thing from there, apart from what audiences may like, is that, again, when you sit doing these political interviews for the longest time, people will either brand you pro-government or pro-party in government or opposition. It's the first time I was doing an interview where both the opposition and the ruling party were all happy with that interview. So I don't know where it left me. I for the very first time, learned of professionals that I've never heard of, and everybody really had a say. And I'm happy that the station and myself are in such a space because then we know we are followed, then we know we are doing something, and we appreciate the feedback. Really, we've learned something, and we'll do better.
Absolutely. One of the things that we've been doing over the last 2 years is to also try and reach into the sub-region and talk about some of the issues affecting them. And one of the big elections, so 2024 was a super election year. Over 60, close to 70 countries around the world had elections, including the US. Including the US, about half of the voting population of the world cast their votes. And Africa saw transitions of power, Botswana, Namibia. No, Namibia did not have a transition. Botswana, Ghana had a transition. Senegal had a transition. But Botswana, close to home, unbelievable what happened in Botswana. Nobody expected it. Maybe the Botswana, but nobody looking from the outside
expected that Masisi would
not even the BDP who were leading that country, but they lost the election. And we also did bite into this to talk about that election. We featured Dumelang Saleshando, and this is an excerpt of that interview.
What is the expectation of you as the Botswana people, as the leading opposition party, on the basis that you've cited some corruption allegations against the former head of state insofar as procurement issues involving his family, the party during COVID and so on? Do you expect President-elect Duma Boko to go after him, since he has also said he's coming in with a cleanup?
Well, what we are proposing as the Botswana Congress Party is a much broader strategy of dealing with corruption. Not only to focus on the misconduct of former President Masisi and his family, but corruption broadly, to establish where the damage was most affected. Who were the key players? Can we recover that which has been looted? What will it take to plug the holes and make sure that we don't have a repeat of what we saw? What needs to be done to strengthen the anti-corruption fighting body in Botswana so that we not only bring the culprits to book, but we also stop the leaks, because the economy cannot afford corruption on the scale that has been taking place in the recent regime.
The challenge I have, President Saleshando, is for many African countries, Zambia inclusive, is you tell me tonight that corruption under, former President Masisi's administration was on a grand scale. Why do we in Africa fail to deal with current corruption? We're now talking about it as post-corruption. Is it the issue of presidential immunity? Is it the issue of the lack of autonomy of investigative wings such as the corruption commissions, the police and the investigators? That interview, obviously, just right after that election, a losing candidate himself in Dumelang Saleshando. But interestingly, he was part of the party that now has gone into government, and he split. He was vice president.
He was vice president of the UDC, and now he's the main opposition leader in the House. He's got about 14 members of parliament there. An interesting interview that we had, obviously from 1966, the BDP had been in power, and in October, an election happens in Botswana and they get to lose the election. Quite big news for the African continent, but also quite big news, for them as Botswana. And I think, like Jonah said, I think we've seen a shift of power from the ruling parties. Even in South Africa, we've seen that now we have a coalition government. The ANC didn't get the majority of the seats, and this has been a trend even for the biggest superpower in the world, the US. We saw that Donald Trump getting back into office, and I think this has been the trend across the African continent. We're about to see to some of the countries that are having elections this year. There's an election again in December, and a couple of elections next year. But for us, the interview that we had with Dumelang Saleshando, the opposition leader, the official opposition leader in Botswana, gave us a perspective of what's happening in Botswana. And I think the expectation is that even as we move towards these other elections across the African continent, we're going to be reaching out to them.
Talking about those political dynamics, coming to you, Jonah, whether this is really the type of geopolitical wind that is blowing. You look at President Lula in Brazil being arrested on corruption charges, bouncing back. It has happened in the US now. John Mahama in Ghana, former president himself, he's bounced back. President Zuma, obviously not bouncing back, but playing a pivotal part in eating into certain strongholds of the ANC in South Africa with the Mkontowesis. The same actually happened in this election in Botswana, in that former President Ian Khama went into self-exile in South Africa but came back to support the opposition. Whether or not he has an impact on the outcome of this election and the confidence that former President Masisi had when he was asked on options whether he would lose. I remember him wearing some sunglasses and dancing. Like, that's how confident he was. And I know that the former ruling party is in Zambia is equally having the same confidence. Is that the wind blowing in Africa?
Well, I've always held that elections are very unique to a specific demographic, and I always find it strange when unique countries think that what has happened in another country is going to happen there. I failed at that science, because the dynamics of what was happening in Botswana are completely different from what is happening here in Zambia. Also, even the political landscape is completely different, given the fact that the current government is a very strong political party in its present form, a very, very strong political party. and diminishing the strength of such a political party would take a lot of time. But not just that. I think the bigger issue is, for what has happened in Ghana, the US, to happen, there needs to be a bit of some deliberate strategy. The opposition of the Patriotic Front claims that there's some strategy, or whatever it is, a plan B to shake things up. But when is that going to happen? Because it seemed like the plan for the Patriotic Front this whole time was for Edgar Lungu to contest.
But just cementing what you're saying, since 1991, when the first government under UNIP was ousted through a democratic election by the MMD, Zambia has never been tested ever in an election where a former president recontests. If Edgar Lungu, regardless of Plan B, legally is allowed to stand somewhere, that will be the first time. But no former president has.
We were almost at that.
KK attempted in 96, but
2015 as well with the Rupiah Banda.
Yes, we were almost. KK attempted in 96. He was barred. That's when the parentage clause was brought in the constitution. Again, Rupiah Banda, the squabble of the MMD presidency in 2015. So we do not have a history where a former head of state has contested to prove whether that comeback can really happen. Donald Trump has tried it in the US. He's made it. Lula in Brazil. John Mahama in Ghana. So for Zambia, you're very right. We cannot say what has worked. We are yet to see what this Plan B really will be, which moves us into our very next, interview, Andrew.
Of course, speaking about Plan B and how the former head of state could still come back and win elections, the month of December was a very big month, not only for us at Diamond TV, but just for the country, because it was the first time ever that the media was allowed to broadcast.
In Curium.
In court.
Per Curium. Or Factors Official.
Factors Official. I think the media was allowed for the first time to broadcast. This is historical, in the history of Zambian media, that the media was allowed to broadcast inside the court premises, but also because of how big this case was that were broadcasting, the eligibility of President Edgar Lungu to contest the future elections, and also the court having to pronounce themselves whether he was eligible to contest the 2021 elections. And so after the court obviously pronounced themselves over this issue, declared Edgar Lungu ineligible to contest future elections, we did sit with the faction Patriotic Front president in Given Luwinda to understand really...
He's vice president.
Yes. Vice President
of a PF of sorts, because there's
I think he was very clear when he came here. That
but it's not up to him though. It's a lot of things happening. Just because I say that I'm the CVO of Diamond 9 Mean I am.
I'm just quoting him. I'm just quoting Given Lewin, the Vice President of
Edgar Lungu
PF. So he says that the three candidates that the PF have so far is Edgar Lungu. The four candidates is Edgar Lungu, Edgar Lungu, Edgar Lungu,
and Edgar
Lungu. So we had an interview with him to really understand what his Plan B is. Costa had an interview with him, and this is how it looked like.
So from last week, I'm sure, obviously, in the heat of the moment, you responded. And like you're saying here, that this ruling and judgment for you has opened a Pandora box and a can of worms to the issues of so many questions that arise. What was very succinct in your remarks at that press briefing was this issue now of Plan B and Edgar still being on the ballot box, and obviously a number of reactions from experts, legal technocrats saying, what does given mean Plan B? As long as it's anything legal, then there's no Plan B. Cornelius Muto says, your Plan B then is just anarchy and mayhem, because legally the Concourt has finally proven that Edgar is not eligible. So could you share with me tonight, what is this Plan B that makes you so confident that Edgar will be on the ballot in 2026?
To answer that question, let me say, out of what is in the heart, the mouth speaks. So when you hear people ranting and saying this Plan B is illegal, it is because that is what is in their mind. Okay, that's what is in their mind. If I said to you, Costa, I'll see you outside, If you're a person who's disposed to violence, you immediately say, he wants to beat me up. But I might just be saying, I'll see you outside because I want to give you a mango. Right? So those who are saying this is plan B is illegal, it is because they themselves are a product of illegality. For them, when you just say, I'm going to make sure that I attend what...
Well, that was the interview with Given Lubinda, the acting vice president of the Edgar Lungu-led, PF. I can admit here, Jonah, that in our mind, we didn't know what he meant when he says he'll see us outside. We did get some mangoes, I can attest to.
Oh, okay.
Well, he did own up to his...
He had some mangoes from his farm. But this plan B is very interesting, really, because from a political standpoint, I think what this grouping of the Tonse Alliance and Edgar and Given Lubinda are trying to do is basically pander to the fact that there's a certain section of the Zambian population that feel let down with the current adversities of power, the high cost of living. And so whether there's a plan for Edgar Lungu to be on the ballot, especially, I think those chances have diminished with the ruling of the Corn Court. It's another subject of discussion whether the Corn Court ruling was politically driven. They said they expected that, and so they always had a plan B, which is a privilege of only a few people. But I think to play politics, they would rather throw it in the people's face, throw it to the UPND that they have a sort of plan, when in fact there's no actual plan B to put Mr. Lungu on the ballot. I know there's been a theory of saying maybe the Constitution can allow him to stand as a running mate to somebody. Again, certain legal experts have equally thrown this out, that the qualifications of a running mate who's potentially a vice president are similar when you look, are not just similar,
are the same.
Are the same when you look at our Constitution. And so if he's disqualified on that basis, he cannot. How else? We are yet to see. But politically, it's very good to keep your opponents guessing because they do not know what ace you have up your sleeve.
I have to say that I think that Given Lubinda is a seasoned politician, and I can see this in all of his interviews. When he has those interviews, he's always very composed, and that's his nature. Also very, very intelligent and thinks on his feet. And I guess one of the things you can acknowledge is, like you just said, that you have to have something up your sleeve. And one thing for sure is the people believe that there is a plan B.
Oh, of course.
And I've seen people, that are very well educated and they know what legal implications mean, and they'll still believe that there's a plan B, that he's going to be on the ballot. And
we're just waiting for plan B.
Exactly.
And in fact, when you talk about his tact, he goes to the extent of playing, and I remember those politics that President Michael Sata would play on an interview where he says, you may not know, Costa, you're also maybe part of the plan B. And we're using you right now. You see, you're exposed to things where, and again, this is where we need to hold some of these politicians accountable, because some public members out there will be gullible and say, even you, Costa, are part of the plan B. Yet he's just merely making a statement. So it's good to keep the opposition really wondering, what is this plan B?
Well, I think the PF have been very smart. Edgar Lungu and his colleagues have been very smart about this plan B. The Tonse Alliance held a press briefing, and for them, they're very insistent that come 2026, Edgar Lungu is going to be on the ballot. We have our plan B that is going to ensure that Edgar Lungu is on the ballot. Like you say, the people that still think that, I personally believe, when they say plan B,
Andrew still believes as well that there's a plan B.
No. When they say there's plan B, there's a plan. Whether Edgar Lungu is going to be there or not going to be there, that is their plan. And I think I love the fact that they've kept a government in check. I think even the Minister of Information and the Chief Government Spokesperson, I think, is a bit threatened by this same plan B because he spoke about it and he was questioning what this plan B could be, and he was saying that we hope that this plan B won't cause anarchy. But it's good that what is keeping Edgar Lungu alive now is the fact that he told people that there's plan B, and people keep waiting what possibly this plan B is. But we had an interview with Sishua, And he offered technical advice to Edgar Lungu. He said, look, the situation that Edgar Lungu finds himself in is something similar that Michael Sata found himself in, something similar that Rupiah Banda found himself in. And he gave Edgar Lungu 2 options to follow. He said he can either follow the Rupiah Banda strategy or follow the KK strategy. When KK was stopped from contesting in 1996 because of that parentage, clause, what did KK do? He boycotted that election in 1996 and couldn't contest the elections. Sishua is of the considered view that had KK supported someone to run into an election, there are possibilities that that person could have probably won the elections. So KK didn't do that, and that's why we're seeing that there's death of the UNIP, because he technically got emotional and boycotted that election. In 2015, what Rupiah Banda did was when there were intra-party fights within the MMD, where there was the Nevas Mumba-led MMD, the Felix Mutati-led MMD. What did Edgar Lungu? What did Rupiah Banda do? He went on to support the government of the day. He went on to support Edgar Lungu. He supported Edgar Lungu, and Edgar Lungu won that election, in 2015. And we saw the influence that Rupiah Banda had on that election because of the fact that he endorsed Edgar Lungu. And political analysts have the considered view that Edgar Lungu could do the same thing that Rupiah Banda did by anointing someone to run in the next election and support him. And he is of the considered view that there's a probability that that person could win. And so those are some of the options that are on the table.
I hear you, and those are some of the options. Without doubt, like Jonah said, there's still a huge constituency or a sizable number of citizens that believe in the PF, that believe in Edgar Lungu. The challenge for me is whether they have that impetus now in sailing through with the candidate that he endorses. Because I think as a country as well, we must shift from the fact that somebody must, it's not a monarchy, that somebody must anoint or appoint somebody, and so we should follow. It should be on the basis of policies. And if the UPND policies and economic strategies are not working, what is Edgar Lungu promising to fix load shedding? What is Edgar Lungu promising to fix the drought, to fix the high cost of living? Not just to say it was better under him.
And not just to say that he's available to do it.
Because it all goes back to the fact that, no, Edgar was just finishing President Sata's term, and so the famous aspect of he had to complete Sata's vision. No, I mean, there should be substance even in the person that he may be rallying behind.
And just to add on to that, I mean, one of the things that we also need to keep in mind as a country, and I guess it's a narrative that has been running for a very long time, since 2021. And I hope that this is not the narrative that the current administration of the UPND is running with, to think that, I don't know, but they've successfully branded Edgar Lungu as some joke. But it's not reality. This is a person who was president of the country for 7 years. This is a person who had over 1 million people vote for him, or 1.8 million people voted for him in the last election. The only thing that can happen to that number is grow, because it is easier to mobilize in opposition than it is when you're in government, and when you're in government with an economy performing the way our economy is performing. Even if it's not going to be a ballot, he may not be a king, but he may be a kingmaker. And so to look at him as useless from a political point of view would be such a dangerous thing to do, because that would be undermining him. And I guess, like you said, Andrew, I guess the UPND is not undermining him, because they do pay quite attention to the Edgar Lungu, especially the Edgar Lungu PF. I don't see them talk much about the Mao Sampa and Robert Chavinga PFs, but they do spend a great deal of response to the Edgar Lungu led PF. And why is this important to talk about? Because we're heading into an election.
And that's why I was saying, when you say it's important, again, the other setback that Edgar Lungu and his team suffers is the fact that there's this crumbling of the PF. Look at how fractured they are in the House. Just after the eligibility judgment, a certain section of MPs said he should retire and accept that. And obviously they started squabbling. Already, like you're saying, there's a certain part with SG Jonah that are holding on to some court documents and Robert Chabinga. There's the other part with Edgar Lungu. They need to put their house in order. Now they've gone to Tonse Alliance. One would have thought that the Tonse Alliance would have been heavily announced had they won Kawambwa. This has not happened. We now know that Ronald Chitotela, who was the former Pambasha Member of Parliament, has been convicted to 10 years. There's a by-election looming there. Parliament has also declared the Petauke seat, was it Petauke, vacant. So again, the measure of politics is how you can win, and they don't seem to be doing so well. But for me, it's also the issue of, yes, it's the PF, but where are the other opposition parties? The Socialist Party seems to be a bit quiet, and we're just a year plus into an election. So they need to quickly put their house in order. And for me, plan B can just be but anything. But all in all, I think this was one of the biggest cases, like you said, that brings about so many things. The world was debating. It has left, again, so many legal questions. How he was eligible in 2021 and now not eligible in 2026. Whether our constitution still needs amendments, whether it's not clear. It has the famous lacuna. Again, it's the fact that the courts do not use language that is understandable enough for the citizens. And I think we should go the route of South Africa and other countries where the constitution is a pocket-sized document translated into different languages for a citizen to understand. I was told of plans to even translate this judgment, but I think it's a sheer waste of money. We should be translating the constitution itself and not a single judgment. But this case, its outcome and how the political landscape 2025 into 2026 will be shaped is what will keep us busy in current affairs.
I have a huge bias on this from a media point of view, that I don't want to obviously talk about the actual outcome of the Constitutional Court, but I think that a precedent similarly has been set by the judiciary to allow the media to broadcast and bring the citizens in on such an important issue. I think that for the first time, people have an understanding to an extent of a case of that magnitude, because majority of the time they would just get a version of it based on what the journalist has written. But they sat through all of it and got an explanation from the Constitutional Court. Whether they understood it is a different issue. But I think that it provided citizens an opportunity to make their own judgment. Unfortunately, I think anything that involves lawyers is just going to be an endless debate.
But going into the future, and I think one thing we've advocated for as media owners, or even MISA and others, even as a station, we've been writing. And I hope that this eligibility case is just the first of many public interest cases. It should not just be political cases. It could be corruption, it could be a big criminal case. As long as it's in public interest, that the media should be allowed. And imagine if the public or the Zambian people were given an opportunity to follow this live on TV and radio from the moment the petition by Chizombe was filed in. So the same with the Oscar Pistorius, the same with the Thabo Bester case, we should be able to follow these cases. I know it's an issue of space, it's an issue of infrastructure, but we have demonstrated already that this can be done one way or the other. I hope this is just the first of many to come of public interest cases that are broadcast so that the public can have... In fact, it even gives more integrity, transparency and credibility for the judiciary. That the public will have confidence in the work that they do if these cases are held in public.
Absolutely.
Finally, I know that Andrew is interested in us winding up on the interview you had with our good colleague at the Ministry of Information and Media, PS Thabo Kawana. I was unable to come through in on this one because the PS and I, obviously, again, he calls me notorious and so on, and I felt on this particular matter to review the year. that really, when we talk about the high cost of living and we talk about all these disruptions, I know he's PS, but I always feel he's not the official government spokesperson to talk about this. But though in the UPND structure, he talks. You had an interview with him, and peculiarly, we are told now that within this structure, you can call fellow permanent secretaries, Andrew?
Well, I think if there's one thing that we can say...
You're picking your words carefully, huh?
Well, you have to comment before I say anything. I think if there's one thing that we must commend Tabo for, is that if you ask him a question and he doesn't have the answer, he will tell you. I think several interviews that we've had with him here on Diamond TV, when we asked him a question around this topic and he doesn't have the answer, he will tell you, Costa, siniziba your answer, I will need to get back to you. On this particular episode of course that we had with him, I think just about 3 weeks ago, I was asking him about CDF and why this government continues to increase CDF when members of parliament from these constituencies are complaining that this CDF is not working. What is the reason for why government every year keeps on increasing CDF? And so he told me that, look, I may not have the competences to give you the actual details of why government is doing this, but I'm going to call a technocrat that is involved highly in decision-making, who is a PS from the Ministry of Local Government. So let me call him whilst you're here, and you can ask him those questions that you want to ask him. But also, he went further on, not only to call the Minister of the PS from local government. I'd asked him a question on mining. Specifically, I'd asked him on the framework that government decided to embark on, and why they've stopped it. So he says, I may not have the answer for that question. Let me call the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Mines for you to be able to get a clear picture of what's happening. And so that's the phone call that he made. And for the avoidance of doubt and for the people that could have not catch this episode of Costa, this is what PS Kawana did.
Has been fired. It's the president's prerogative to bring in different players at different times. So sometimes he elevates, sometimes he demotes, and sometimes he fires. It's all part of his mandate.
One of the things that we've seen that this administration has continuously done is increase CDF on an annual basis. Even in the 2025 budget, CDF has been increased. What is government thinking around CDF that perhaps many...
We are implementing the decentralization policy. The idea is to take the money away from the center and take it to the people. Let the people determine their own developmental trajectory. Whereas you had a situation where you had a meager 1.6 million given as constituency development, today you have got over 30 million given, and the people are able to determine themselves. That is why you are able to see that where there were no schools and classrooms, they are there. Where children were sitting on the floor and on rocks, they are sitting on desks. Where there were no maternity sections or wings, they are there now. Not just maternity, but they have solar lighting and they have proper water reticulation. All that is what the people desired, but did not have the resources. This government has said, what you desire, what you prioritize as a people, the money is here. So, like I said earlier, that one of the ways we are doing as a ministry is to ensure that when we're discussing certain matters, we bring in the people themselves that are dealing with it, so that you get, you satisfy your questions, so that the Zambian people also benefit by getting the correct and precise information. So one of the things I want to beg your indulgence here is that even on this program as we are live, you allow me that I should be able to wake up my colleagues, not that they are sleeping, they can never sleep. If you can allow me, I'll be able to call. Let me try and see if I can.
So that was our previous interview with the PS Minister of Information and Media. Quite an unorthodox way of really communicating there. But it can only be Andrew and PS Kawana, really. Because the other time I remember, again discussing this last year, it was the fact of whether we had accused him of storming into here. Yet the producer knew really how well the fact that he was coming on board with Nakachinda and things like that. But I'll not talk really, because the PS explains that this is what they are trying to do to get everybody accountable. I think the only thing I can advise this administration, the president has lamented on this that they feel they're doing very poorly on their communication strategy. They feel as a government they have delivered a lot of development through CDF projects, through the IMF restructuring, through mining investment and so on. And they seem to have a huge information gap. I mean, I've seen attempts where, you know, some outside experts have had to sit with ministers, have had to sit with top government officials in sessions through the president and so on. I know that more recently there was an appointment of principal public relations officers. I do not know how they will collaborate with existing PR people within, you know, ministries. State House in itself does not still have a presidential spokesperson. They've got now a number of communication strategists and specialists. The Ministry of Information in itself has got a director spokesperson. It's got the permanent secretary. It's got the official government spokesperson, who is the minister. You see the presidential advisor for investments doing his own social media packaging as well on a number of issues. So you've got all these loose entities. So when I see the PS on an interview saying he's going to call the PS local government, the PS mining, on an interview like that, why not just make these various offices available on a specific topic? If we need to exhaust mining, let's exhaust mining with these people. If we need to exhaust local government, rather than through the PS, a phone call being... I've never seen that happen.
But I think it was very clear. If we have live shows like that one, you have a call that calls in and asks a PS part of the question that was not structured, you know, in your script, and so for the PS to basically respond effectively to that question, and not throw away the caller who's called in and say, because I'm PS information, I can't answer a question on mining, and so wait for Andrew to invite, you know, another PS. For me, I see that as being innovative. But like you said earlier on, you know, Silvio, there are times that we've wanted specific people for specific interviews. For example, the Minister of Agriculture. We've been wanting the Minister of Agriculture for a very long time to be able to break down some of the things that he's doing under his ministry, especially now that, you know, we have a potential food insecurity in our country. The Minister is nowhere to be,
But my argument is, from an orthodox perspective, it's a very tricky ground to trade, really, when you're doing live TV. First of all, whether the issue of phones and all these, that's why I'm saying it can only be Andrew, well known for that. Now, let's imagine, obviously, if it's a caller and says, why hasn't the president addressed this issue? Will it be easy for anybody now, a minister, to pick live on TV and say, Mr. President, there's this question I cannot answer. Can you answer? I think it's going to be very difficult, if that's really their strategy, that they can call anybody at night and they get to answer.
But, well, you have a point, and I think it's over specific things that, you know, you could go to extents of waking up a PS. I think at that time you even mentioned that even as I'm about to call this guy, I don't know whether he's sleeping. Unfortunate enough, you know, he was at work. But I think for me, what stands out, especially from the Ministry of Information and Media, you know, is the fact that the PS has been very proactive, you know, in ensuring that the people that are in government, especially, come for some of these interviews. I think there's some times that we've written to him to complain that we've been trying to write, you know, to these people to get their reaction, but they haven't made themselves available. I think you would go an extra mile by wanting to assist to ensure that these people do come through. So I think for me, if you look at the line of PSs that this administration has had, I think Kawana is one that is a bit proactive.
I do agree with you, obviously, as producer. You know best how handy he comes in. I've interacted with him on certain aspects in terms of how quite pushy he is in trying to make sure that government communication is enhanced. And when you compare, I mean, every administration has their own way of working. I think when you looked at the PF, there was a bit of a clash between the party and government in terms of, I think you had Sunday Chande a bit more louder than the government spokesperson. In certain instances within this administration, sometimes the PS would be talking. But we see, I don't know, I'm yet to see how these PPROs of the ministries will work now, whether they will officially speak. Some permanent secretaries speak more than others. Some ministers do come out. I know the Minister of Commerce does speak often. The Minister of Tourism does speak often. Then Minister of Justice as well used to speak quite a lot. Mlambo Haimbe. So they've got their own way of how they're trying to come out. And I think one other interview I can take note as we wind up this discussion is Minister Elias Mubanga. I think we had a very interesting interview, though we're going to pick out an excerpt from that. He was asking that we be kind.
Yes. I don't think you were kind. I think...
No, he admitted. But very quickly, I think that sums up 2024 in the eyes of Costa and current affairs. What would be important, we began to really analyze the year. What's the outlook for 2025?
I think before we can look at the outlook for 2024, I think there's some
for 2025.
2025, there's some of the interviews that we had on Costa that didn't see light of day. I remember receiving a call from yourself, Sivio, after we did an interview with Kantanshi Member of Parliament, Honorable Anthony Mumba, you sending me that court notice to the effect that we can't flight the interview because obviously there's an injunction in court restraining Honorable Anthony Mumba from branding himself as chairman of the Patriotic Front. This was brought in by Mao Sampa, and so that interview we still have it in our archives. I don't know, Jonah, when we could air it, but we still have it, in our archives. That's an interview that didn't show, but also another interview that didn't show. Interestingly enough, is by P.S. Tawakawa. There's a time that we did an interview with him. We only realized that we had a technical fault with that interview. That interview came out without sound, and so we couldn't proceed, with that interview. But interviews also that would have loved to have, especially this year, was from Edgar Lungu himself and the Republican President, Hakainde Hichilema. We've been writing to those two individuals for a very long time, especially this year, in trying to bring them over to come through. We're hoping that 2025 is going to be a different year. But also, I think what we had planned for Costa at the end of 2023 was that this year we'll also do a balance in terms of featuring both male and female sources. But I think it's been pretty not a good year in terms of us having that balance, and we hope that next year we're going to do better in terms of ensuring that at least we have a balanced we have a balanced guest list for 2025. But 2025 promises to be a very good year, promises to be a highly good year in terms of politics and current affairs. And I think we'll be able to do most of the things that we had planned that we didn't do, bring more international guests as well. Like people might be aware that we've expanded as Diamond TV into SADC. Obviously, you see the likes of many of these big guys, from SADC coming over to Diamond TV. But also, we plan on expanding in terms of our interviews to even outside SADC. So you see most of our interviews, us going into West Africa, East Africa, in getting some of the news stories, of the week from those respective countries. And so 2025 looks to be a very good year, for us at Diamond TV, and specifically, for Costa.
Jonah?
What an interesting year it's been, and 2025 also interesting because of the fact that it's an official start to building up to what should be a 2026 election. So there's all that is coming up, and it's going to be quite heated in terms of talking about the political landscape of the country. But I think that some of these issues that were talked about in 2024 continue into 2025, like the energy situation that ties heavily into the economic performance of the country, the economic performance of individuals. So all of these issues will be addressed in the coming year as we line up over 50 episodes of Costa.
Well, so there you have it, breaking down 2024 in the current affairs lens. Myself, Jonah, Buyoya, as well as Andrew Mwansa, our producer of Costa. Thank you so much for the feedback and, of course, the followership on our Facebook pages. That is Diamond Media Zambia, Diamond TV Online. Also on YouTube, Diamond TV Zambia. So 2025, like has been said, promises to be quite engaging, exciting, insightful, trying to take it beyond the studio to outside, balancing characters leaders, more diversity in terms of civil society, more diverse in terms of topics. And it's just but the start of an election build-up that is coming in 2026. So we wish you, great holidays, safe holidays, and a prosperous 2025. From us here in studio and the Current Affairs crew, happy holidays and prosperous 2025.
Costa was brought to you by FQM Trident Limited, a subsidiary of First Quantum Minerals Limited.
It's Christmas season and we decided to take the Christmas spirit to the streets. Because what is a Christmas celebration without the community? Now it's time we test the knowledge of our people and see how well they know the birth of Jesus Christ. Come with me. How would you react if your wife came to you, or let me say your fiancé came to you, you're engaged, and then she says, I'm pregnant and I'm going to conceive by the power of the Holy Spirit? What? Could I repeat the question? Where was Jesus Christ born? Anabadwa kuti Yesu.
Nazareth.
Bamai ba Yesu bezedwandani zina.
Nibadutina mwamba.
It's just, what a mess.
Jesus Christ was born on the 25th of December.
25th of December. Which scripture says that?
Well, it's not really a scripture, but they estimate the position of the stars.
Oh my God! Wow!
Just 1 minute. Okay, so Yesu Kristo afiere kuisa.
Afiere mwitanga lya ng'ombe.
Where was Jesus Christ born?
I'm not really sure because I don't celebrate Christmas.
Can you mention some of the animals that were in the manger the time Christ was born?
I think I remember cows, sheep. I think maybe even a goat.
Mama iba Yesu. Niba Yesu Kristo.
How come I didn't know about this?
Watate ba Yesu Kristo wenzeni bandani zina pa festi na yala sane myabo wenzeni bandani.
Sainemu ya Joseph singa izo mshemushe kumanza kuti Joseph yenze tatoko wa Yesu Kristo panana kuli Maria pamene benze mchisumbali.
Joseph imofuna ngala teacher ku church imwe. What ndi mwa teacher? What is the name of the king that tried to kill baby Jesus?
King Herod.
Angel wamena nabwera kuli Mary kumuza kuti uzanga na mwana enze ni dani zina Angel.
Abarako madamu kudara.
Alisembo banda.
Messi Chibuye Nyati.
Jeni tipitilize kutandala.
Madiva Mukomboni neshita ya 12 hours up to 14 hours.
Jeni tipitilize kutandala. Pa Thursday kunena kutipa chinai. Nandawi ya 12 hours to 14 hours mu studio.
Na Pachibelushi from 11 hours up to 13 hours.
Osa idala.
Dice Madiva Wokwana.
Hey kids! Mommy, did you get them? Sweetheart, of course I did. Come on, let's wrap it up nicely before Grandpa gets here.
Grandpa!
You mean a pity move?
Grandpa will have a gift for you.
What is it, my dear?
It's brown.
Brown.
It's crunchy. And it has a favorite. Oh, delicious.
I like it already.